Our next speaker literally wrote the book on intelligence-driven incident response. Today, he's here to talk with us about how a mini-sized team can build up a tank-sized intelligence repository. Please welcome Scott Roberts.
I am Scott Roberts. I'm the head of threat research at a company called Interpres. We're a relatively early stage startup, but my job is to try to get the intelligence we need. So let's talk a little bit about a quick version of what we do. And this is really, we're a company that tries to help you understand how do the threats you face actually meaningfully decide what defense you should have. And so we use MITRE ATT&CK as the basis for that to go from threat profile to who are the adversaries you care about, to what are the TTPs those adversaries use, to what are the techniques you should be looking for. Along the way, we can do some other things around helping you optimize defense and figure out which tools are doing really well for you and which ones don't. But we started as an intel team. And I say that before I joined, before we were doing any intelligence. And the way they started was somebody pulled down MITRE ATT&CK/CTI and just started working off of it. So that was what our basis was. And when I came in, the first question we had to ask ourselves was, are we going to stick with using MITRE ATT&CK or are we going to do something completely different? Based on the fact I'm standing on this stage, I hope you've guessed, we decided to stick with MITRE ATT&CK. But we needed custom data. We couldn't just pull everything off of GitHub, use that as our basis, and have that be enough for customers that were sending in their own requirements, had their own needs. And so we had to come up with some solutions to extend MITRE ATT&CK a little bit further. So we had four main things we were really trying to do. We needed depth. We needed to have as much information about any of the threats we deemed relevant as possible. We needed breadth. We needed to capture a pretty wide variety of threats because we had customers ranging from financial side of things to government side, kind of everything in between. We needed speed. When I first talked with our sales team, one of the first things they came to me and said was, we need fast. We have customers who are asking us about the thing that they saw on Krebs yesterday. How quickly can you get us information about it? And then lastly, if you've ever done any type of intelligence work, accuracy is key. Having a lot of deep, good information that's totally incorrect is not going to give you a lot of benefit to anybody. So we use these as the beginning of our goals. So beyond anything, the other thing I had to deal with was the fact that I'm sitting in the engineering org. First intelligence hire, they're not going to give me a directorship right off the bat. I've got ambitions, don't get me wrong, but I had to go where I go. So I'm in the engineering department. So the first thing I dealt with was everything needs to be code. We need to be able to understand it, use that for our workflows. We're managing things on Git or Jira. And frankly, I'm a former GitHubber, so I just default to, if it's not code, it's not real. So first priority was it had to be in Git. Depth and breadth were really collection requirements. Everybody has good collection requirements they're working off of, I'm sure. All the head nods, great. Speed was about automation. We had to, if we're already going to be building tools, we're already going to be writing all of our intel to code, we can focus on automation. And then accuracy was the same thing. And I've already talked a little bit about how we were trying to be compatible because all of our original tooling was built to ingest MITRE ATT&CK. So let's just stick with that. I've run into three big problems. I've actually run into like 6 or 7 big problems, but it's a 15-minute talk, so forgive me. The first one, if you haven't run into this, STIX is not ATT&CK, and ATT&CK is not STIX. They are interrelated, they are close, but they are not exactly the same thing. And that ended up being a set of headaches we'll talk about in a second. We needed our own intelligence to sit alongside MITRE ATT&CK, because the thing that I didn't want to do is throw away the fantastic work that was being done by the ATT&CK team. And that's why we didn't just replace MITRE ATT&CK. We wanted to continue using MITRE ATT&CK while also bringing in our own intelligence. And lastly, tooling is tough. If you're doing this work, if you're building all these things, I'm sure you either have your own solution or you're using one of the vendor solutions out there. But again, and this is where I went to the A-team analogy, we didn't have the budget to go buy a bunch of tools or even the time to build a lot of things. So we had to figure out how do you strap armor onto a Toyota and turn it into a tank. So here's what we did. And I put this out here both as here's what I did, but also if you have ideas on things I should have done, let's talk afterwards. This one wasn't easy. Honestly, the biggest thing I could come up with for dealing with the fact that sticks is not attack and attack is not sticks is just doing better remembering it and building tools that had that memory built into it. So, anytime there's a reference inside our tools to a particular attack primitive, there's probably an easy way to figure out what the sticks2 primitive that went along with it was. Doing automation that remembers that attack patterns are actually tactics, don't get stuck on that, was really the best way to go. So there's a non-trivial portion of my brain dedicated to keeping track of where all that stuff is at this point. And in case you think I'm the one who's not keeping up, it turns out ChatGPT is really bad at this as well. I like the idea that tactics and techniques are relationships, attack patterns and techniques are attack patterns, sure. I don't even know where it came up with all this. And this is for all of my students who are watching. This is why we don't use ChatGPT for everything. So what about the duplication? Well, it turns out the easiest way to do this was basically just to run attack next to attack. And so what I have up here is literally on one side, it is the MITRE CTI repo, and on the other side is our Interpres CTI repo. The layouts are almost the exact same thing for good reason. We basically build all our tools with the idea that depending on the function, you either look for our attack repo first or the MITRE attack repo first, and then all automation is built off of that. And I'll show you what that looks like in just a second. So wherever possible, though, we're defaulting to MITRE attack content. It turns out, especially when you get into building it yourself, you realize how much time and effort went into building this type of content, and there is no good reason to reinvent this wheel. We focus primarily on three things: creating our own groups, four things really. Creating our own groups, creating our own campaigns, creating our own malware, and creating our own relationships. At the point where we're going to try to reinvent a technique or something like that, I'm probably having a conversation with somebody at the attack team to say, here's what we think needs to be available. Relationships end up being split. And we do leverage all the attack relationships that are built in, but we also build relationships that point from our content back to the MITRE content. So this is where we get to leverage the things that already exist. But the one smart thing we did, this is one of those things where we did a smart thing not knowing it was a smart thing until later, is in all of our public tooling, everything points to our stuff first. The result is in situations where we need something that's going to duplicate, we can actually just copy the MITRE version over into our own repo, make the changes we need to, and then have everything keep going without having to rearrange all the relationships. Because if you try messing with relationships too quickly, it turns out sideways in a hurry. I really wanted to release some of the tools I had to do this, but we're not quite ready for it yet. But I had such a good name, I needed to share it. Sticks and Stones? That's genius. Next year, we'll see what we can do. And to that end, the tooling to work with all this content is also somewhat limited. So we built most of our own tooling primarily using the Sticks2 library. We went back and forth on doing that. Do we want to use Workbench? Do we want to use some of the other tools? The Sticks2 library ended up being the most flexible for us ultimately for the two big use cases we have. One use case is kind of an auto mapper tool. The idea is let computers do things computers are good at, which is things like looking for strings in big blocks of text and all that. And everything else we do using Jupyter Notebook. I'll be honest, it's not the easiest way to approach things. Building our own Jupyter Notebooks, I've gotten to know the Sticks2 library way too well. I didn't ever expect to be so deep into it. But the result is we get not just our intel as code, but the creation of our intelligence as code. And that means I can work with our developers. I can even work with my boss, who's used to doing code reviews, not reading Intel reports. And he can see what I did, how I did it, why we got to the answers we got to. And it makes things repeatable, later on. We have built a couple helpers to go along with it. Most of these are focused on moving around relationships. Like I said, if you all of a sudden realize something's pointed at X and you want it pointed at Y, that can get pretty messy when you're going through relationships across two different repos that need to be moved around. So building some helpers that way has been really useful for us. And lastly, I did say I worked at GitHub, so everything is managed in Git. This gives us a couple fundamental things. It gives us the ability to move stuff around. It gives us the ability to revert changes and view them all in the same interface, which is GitHub. So what's this actually look like? Well, I built some code using our auto mapper, and it turns out our continuous integration threw a fit. So this is all using Sticks Validator as well as some of our own tools. And I go in and look at it, and it comes back and tells me that a particular resource was invalid in one of the campaigns. This URL is blank, which is not a URI. I go into Jupyter Notebook. I've got a couple helpers in there, but I pull it up, make a new version, add the URI that's missing with a new external reference. Make a couple mistakes in moving my GitHub around, so ignore the mistakes there, but eventually get Sticks Validator to run locally. Everything's good. Runs okay in CI. Hit pull request, and everybody's happy. So what are we going to do longer term? Well, as I said, there's some challenges here. I can't expect every analyst to want to go in and move Sticks2 objects around using the CTI, the Sticks repo. So we're probably going to be moving to something leveraging Vertex Synapse. But the goal ultimately is to still keep writing the content back out as Sticks data. That part is built into our tools and has been really useful for us in making sure that we have a solid target, as well as building all these checks like our CI that know how to understand what's going on there. And lastly, a quick quote from Salvador Dali. This is not the end. This is not even necessarily the best version we've thought of so far, but we're going to keep chasing perfection on it because we can keep doing better. And with each step, we've gotten a little bit more out of it. So, thank you.
Excellent talk, and it reminds me of an old saying. Was it sticks and stones may break my bones, but sticks particularly hurts my head. So shout out to our software dev team for saving us from that. So actually, one of the things I wanted to highlight, we probably have time for one question, but I appreciate the fact that you conceptually were using ATT&CK as that foundation, rather than thinking everything needs to be there and just searching it. And again, you mentioned the opportunity for contribution, but like blending your own intelligence, your own insights with what's kind of already that baseline. I think that's really what we're looking for very often is ATT&CK as that stepping stone to maybe a thought of way of seeing the problem, but really just a pattern and a model to kind of, as we talked about, see new adventures, see new threats, see new problems. But as I said, we have time for maybe one question. I know Sticks is a very maybe yay or nay topic, but any ideas? Okay. One for me is just I know venturing into Sticks, as we saw, it's a pretty maybe high learning curve. What would be kind of your recommendations for just someone getting started? Like you mentioned, your first step was forking that MITRE CTI repository. Is there any tips or tricks, any reusable resources, or just dive in, trial and error, pivot?
I think what helped was taking the time to go look for the things I already understand, look for a threat group that I knew really well, and go, okay, what are the campaigns that what are the campaigns that are referencing them, or what are the what's their group object look like, and reading through it and going, okay, I can at least recognize where some of these things are coming from, and I know some of those reports and things like that. And then at the same token, getting it into Jupyter and playing with it that way. And this was where using GitHub was really useful because I made a branch. If I messed it up, git reset, go back to normal, everything's okay. So yeah, I think we actually do have a question back there.
Unfortunately, we're running out of time, but we can follow up later. But I love that approach of start small, know your use case, and just keep pushing.
There you go.
small token
All
of
right.
appreciation. Thank you
Thank
so
you.
much. Great job.
All right.